morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, I want to talk to you about the 2022 rotation, which I know sounds weird when I'm sitting here in February 2021 talking about something that's going to be happening in late August, early September 2022. I am in fact looking 18 months in the future, but I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, I have a point, and it is a point that is related to now. You see, I've had a couple of questions from lovely people over the past couple of weeks, including the wonderfully named Usernames Are Hard over on my Patreon Discord, patreon.com/PTCG Radio, if you want to support the channel, get involved, etc. And they have pointed out to me that the regulation marks in the Shining Fates cards are not exactly uniform. For instance, we can look at the new Celebi, and that's got a regulation mark of E, whereas we can look at Dalmai's VMAX, and that's got a regulation mark of D. And this is interesting because they are both brand new cards that are making their debut in Shining Fates. So the question is, why do these cards have different regulation marks? I know, and I'm going to tell you in a moment. And what impact is that going to have on the Pokemon trading card game? And I know that as well. I'm going to tell you in a moment. But I suppose we should probably actually have a look first at what these regulation marks are for people that might not know. Now, these actually started in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, in Japan, they've had them for a while. Shockingly enough, and this might shock some of you to your very core, but please stay with me, Japan started at A. Now, we didn't. We're a little bit slow. We're a little bit behind. We started on D. And it's not because we're weird. It's because we didn't want to do regulation marks with Japan. And then we turned around and went, well, hang on a second. Actually, yes, we do. So we'll start from Sword and Shield, and Sword and Shield starts from D. So if you look at all of the Sword and Shield cards we've had so far, from the Sword and Shield base set all the way through to Vivid Voltage, you will notice that they all in the bottom left-hand corner have a regulation mark of D. Now, if we go to the last rotation announcement, this actually is explained a little bit here as well. It says all cards from the Sword and Shield series have a letter in the bottom left corner called a regulation mark. In the future, this mark will determine which cards are allowed in tournament play. For the 2021 season, all cards with a D regulation mark are legal to use in tournaments. New cards with this regulation mark must still follow the appropriate waiting period to become tournament legal, typically 2 weeks. So the format we're in at the moment, all of the Ds are legal for tournament play. But, of course, we had a bunch of cards from pre-Sword and Shield sets which are still legal for tournament play, which don't have a regulation mark. If you take a look at, for instance, Pikachu and Zekrom doesn't have a regulation mark. Outside of Japan. Inside of Japan, it has regulation mark D. And this is really important, because as it stands at the moment, we have actually ended up with a different rotation ever so slightly to Japan because of these regulation marks. You see, we rotated to Team Up on, but Japan rotated to regulation mark C and onwards. Which essentially means that Japan actually rotated to Tag Bolt on, their Sun and Moon 9, which is of course largely the same as our Sun and Moon 9, which is Team Up, but not entirely the same. Because you see, Japan's Sun and Moon 8A set, Dark Order, that made its way into Team Up for us. And Dark Order was the last set in Japan that had regulation mark B. Which means that we've got a bunch of cards in our format at the moment, notably things like the Jirachi with the awesome ability, Tapu Koko Prism Star, Metal Goggles, that have actually rotated out in Japan. And the reason essentially is that Japan rotated to regulation mark C, and we rotated to Team Up, which was made of a main set and a mini set in Japan, but the mini set that came into our Team Up was actually regulation mark B. So our rotation is largely the same as Japan's, but it's not entirely the same as Japan's for this exact reason. And this is clearly something that Pokemon want to change. If we look a couple of weeks ago when Wally and Lusamine were unbanned, Japan literally came out and said, in an effort to maintain a more global expanded format experience, 2 cards were unbanned. So the Pokemon Company International are literally coming out and saying, we want the format to be the same in Japan and over here. We want it to be the same worldwide. So clearly our rotations are going to have to match up, and they are going to have to match up perfectly. Now, when we hit August, September 2021, this isn't going to be an issue, because Regulation Mark D started in Sword and Shield. And whereas our main sets are generally Japan's main set and their previous mini set, obviously when a new block like Sword and Shield starts, we don't do that. Their Sword and Shield is our Sword and Shield. We're not going to get some random Sun and Moon mini set put into the Sword and Shield base set. That would be dumb. So when we hit August, September 2021, we're going to rotate to rotation or Regulation Mark D onwards, which is going to be Sword and Shield on, which is going to be lovely. So with all of that explained in terms of regulation marks, what does it have to do with Shining Fates? And essentially what it has to do with Shining Fates is the first time in English, or essentially outside of Japan, where we see Regulation Mark E. And again, this is not a particularly difficult prediction to make. I don't think I'm the only one that's making this prediction. If Rotation 2021 is going to be to Regulation Mark D onwards, then Rotation 2022 is going to be to Rotation Mark E onwards. That seems like a pretty sensible suggestion. Which essentially means that half of Shining Fates is going to rotate out, and half of it is not. Now, of course, one question straight off the bat here is, well, isn't that going to be confusing if half of a set is legal and half of a set's not? And the answer is no. No, that's not going to be confusing. It's actually going to be a lot less confusing. How many people do you think, proper casual players that play a little bit here and there, how many people do you think know that Pikachu and Zekrom came around in Team Up, and then Reshiram and Charizard came around 3 months later in Unbroken Bonds? What actually happens is that your average person is going to go and have a look at the set symbol to see which set a card actually came out in. And when they're trying to decide if a card is legal or not, they're going to go and check the set symbol, and they're going to go and check whether that set is legal for tournament play or not. Now, it's going to be so much simpler. Look at the letter in the bottom left-hand corner. Is it D or above? If yes, legal. A year later, is it E or above? If yes, legal. I know we're rotating half of Shining Fates, but not the other half. But because you can just look at the letter, it's not going to matter. And your average casual fan really isn't an encyclopedic knowledge of which cards came out in which sets. So just having a letter in the bottom left-hand corner to decide what's legal is going to make so much more sense. It's going to be weird that we're rotating half of Shining Fates, but it really does make an awful lot more sense. So then, of course, we get to the question of, well, how did this happen? How do we end up with this set, which is half Regulation Mark D and half Regulation Mark E? And the answer is that Shining Fates is a weird Frankenstein kind of set, which is made from a whole bunch of different cards here and there. So, for instance, a bunch of the new cards came around from Shiny Star V. Shiny Star V was essentially the equivalent of this over in Japan, and there were a bunch of new cards that were brought in that made their debut in Shiny Star V. Now, there weren't a huge amount of them, but you could look at cards like Rotom and Ball Guy, for instance, brand new cards that made their debut in Shiny Star V, so they get Regulation Mark D. We also have, and these are a little bit weirder, but we've got Cramorant and Delmise VMAX. Now, these are brand new VMAXs, which are coming around in the set for the very first time. We've never seen these before. And these actually came around in a special VMAX set in Japan that I've mentioned in many videos over the past couple of months, because I genuinely believe it is the coolest set around, because you get one pack of every set that's been released in Japan so far plus you get one of those 4 VMAXs, 2 of which are brand new, never before seen. They're amazing, plus some hollow energy if you're into that. But the point is, they're really, really cool, but again, they were Regulation Mark D. I should also, I suppose, mention Ditto V and VMAX and Crobat VMAX, that again were brand new VMAXs, but they made their debut in Shiny Star V, so again they end up being ported over here with Regulation Mark D. So where did the E's come from? And the answer is they came from the Blastoise and Venusaur VMAX decks. For some reason, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's over to Japan as to why exactly they did this, but Japan decided that the beginning of Regulation Mark E was going to be the Blastoise and Venusaur VMAX decks. And now over here, we're not getting the same stuff. We are getting the Blastoise and Venusaur V Battle decks, which are new decks, which to be fair do have a few new cards in them. And we are getting the promo boxes with the VMAXs. But over in Japan, they were brand new decks of a whole bunch of new cards, and that is essentially where Japan drew the line. So, if we look, and to be fair, most of these cards are kind of trash, but I suppose Manaphy and Celebi. Manaphy and Celebi, outside of the Vs and VMAXs, which aren't in Shining Fates, Manaphy and Celebi really are the only 2 cards from those VMAX decks over in Japan that actually ended up looking like really good cards. We won't know for certain until we've had a whole bunch of tournaments, but it really does seem like they are going to be the ones that actually end up being good in the future. They are essentially the only good ones. And then there are a whole bunch of kind of trashy cards from those sets. So things like, I mean, the Yanmega, to be fair, isn't terrible. But then we can look at a whole bunch of stuff like the Cramorant, and with the best will in the world, that Cramorant is not a good card. So they end up coming through with Regulation Mark E. So essentially, the long story short is, cards that began life in the Venusaur and Blastoise VMAX decks in Japan will be printed in Shining Fates with Regulation Mark E, and they are going to survive the rotation in 2022. Cards printed before that, like Dalmai's VMAX, like Ball Guy, they were printed earlier in Japan, and they will not be surviving that rotation. Yeah, I know it's a little bit in the future, but firstly, I got a bunch of questions about it. Secondly, it is something that is a little bit weird if you're not completely obsessed with a Pokemon trading card game like I am. And thirdly, come on, it's kind of a cool, interesting story, right? I hope so, at least. For now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to know what you think about this, and I want to know if you agree with me when I say it's going to make things a whole bunch easier. So let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.